Recorded Books presents Finding Home, Starfish Bay, Book 2, by Irene Hannon. Narrated by Thérèse Plummer. Chapter 1. The kid was back. Again. Putting himself in danger. Again. Bracing against the gusty March wind on the point, Scott Walsh squinted at the blonde-haired boy. He was 10, maybe 11. The perfect age to be tempted by all the heavy equipment on the Northern California headland. 25 years ago, that could have been him. He would have found the allure hard to resist, too. But empathy didn't equate to tolerance. He flexed the fingers of his left hand and glanced down at the scars crisscrossing the back, the shiny white lines and limited mobility a constant reminder that, when it came to safety, he couldn't afford to be Mr. Nice Guy. Lips clamped together, he switched his focus back to the boy. The kid had been smart, waiting until the crew called it quits for the weekend before venturing out here. He'd also managed to elude the off-hours security guard, though that wouldn't have been difficult. The long-retired Humboldt County deputy was more show than substance, his presence intended to deter rather than enforce. The boy's back was to him as he examined the bucket on one of the giant excavators, then proceeded to check out the crawler treads that were as tall as he was. Last time he'd spotted the kid, Scott had yelled at him from across the construction site, and the youngster had taken off before he got close. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Scott wove through the obstacle course of equipment, trenches and lumber, where all of the foundation work for the upscale inn had been completed on schedule, as promised. Meeting deadlines was a sticking point with him, and a hallmark of Walsh Construction. It was also one of the reasons Matson Properties had chosen his firm to tackle the high-profile project. Not a day passed that he didn't give thanks for this opportunity, and the much-needed income it was providing. The wind in the needled branches of the spruce and hemlock trees, along with the muted crash of surf on the rocks below the towering headland, masked his footsteps as he approached the excavator. He'd like nothing better than to grab the boy by the scruff of his neck and haul him back to his negligent parents. But touching him wouldn't be smart. The parents could sue him for assault if they were ticked off. He'd have to settle for getting in the kid's face and putting the fear of the Almighty into him. Not until his shadow fell over him did the boy realize he had company. By the time he spun around, Scott was only 2 feet away. The youngster's panicked gaze darted left, then right. He whipped his head around to look behind him, but the excavator treads cut off that avenue of escape. Scott invaded his space, placing his hands on the treads on either side of the boy's head to pin him in. Long enough, he hoped, to get his message across.
"I thought I told you 2 days ago to stay out of here."
The boy stared up at him in silence, eyes wide, face colorless.
"Construction sites are dangerous, and so is this stuff."
Scott banged a hand against the metal body of the excavator above the kid's head. The boy flinched and folded his body into a protective tuck. Then he started to shake. Scott frowned. He'd dealt with plenty of curious kids on job sites in Eureka, and most had been defiant. As a result, he'd ramped up his tough guy stance over the past 4 years. But this wasn't a big city like Eureka, where gangs and drugs caused problems. The only gang in this tiny town was probably the group of seniors who met every Wednesday morning at the Starfish Bay Mercantile's coffee nook to OD on caffeine. A twinge of remorse tugging at his conscience, he softened his tone a fraction, eased back a few inches, and planted his fists on his hips.
"What's your name?"
The boy might be scared, but he was thinking clearly enough to see his opening. Instead of responding, he lunged past Scott and tore off for the woods, legs pumping, dirt flying. Scott stayed where he was as he cupped his hands around his mouth.
"If I see you around here again, I'm going to call the county sheriff."
The boy cast a terrified look over his shoulder and kept running. 30 seconds later, he disappeared behind the sheltering branches of the coniferous trees that separated.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?